Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
And I'm Sylvia Earle. I'm an oceanographer, National Geographic Explorer at Large, founder of Mission Blue, and I am an ocean elder.
Yay.
Thank you, ocean elders, for sponsoring this program.
And this is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. And we're glad to be back and hope everyone has made some time to get outdoors. You can ask questions by putting them in the Q&A box, and later on in the program, we'll get through as many of them as we can. And we'll also be adding links in the chat as the conversation goes on. And as we get started today, let's remind everyone that the world
is
blue.
Don't ever forget that.
Exactly. And today we're really honored and excited to have Salomé Buglass joining. See, you
did it great.
Yeah. Anyway, Salomé is going to talk to us about her work in the deep sea and how it has led her to focus on kelp. So welcome.
Thank you.
Sharing your slides this time.
Yeah, well, do you want me to start right on with sharing the slides?
Dive in.
Dive in. That's what it's
excellent. Well, it's an honor to be here. So thanks for having me. I'll just load my slide here.
Yeah.
It's especially nice to see you, Salomé. We were diving together not so long ago in the Galapagos.
Yeah, just a little over a year ago. Yeah. So it's always good to reunite with you. So yeah, thanks for having me. And I want to talk a little bit about the work that I've been doing. A lot of it is being helped by Sylvia, who has been my field and dive partner in some of these in my field work. Yeah, so my title is Hiding in the Deep, Studying Galapagos Kelp Ecosystems. And I want to just give a land acknowledgement because I'm based in Vancouver, BC, and this is the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. So I'm privileged to be in their lands and doing my PhD here.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and well, let me make sure that I can. So just a little bit about me, just as a background. I feel like I'm a little bit of a marine biologist, a surfer. Like I entered through the back door. I actually studied geography first and biogeography, specifically freshwater ecology. And I spent a lot of time walking up and down rivers, collecting invertebrates and freshwater fish. And then I got a job in marketing in Trinidad and Tobago. But while I was there, I got a scholarship to learn how to dive. And I think that was the unexpected stepping stone that made me stumble into the ocean. and
was the scholarship through?
With Coral Cay Conservation. It's a British, it's kind of like Project Wallace, like similar. I think they don't exist anymore, but they were giving scholarships to local Trinidadians, and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. So I got a scholarship, I learned how to dive. And from being someone who was very scared in the water and always thinking a shark's gonna eat me, I quickly learned that it's a privilege to encounter a shark underwater because there's such few left. And this was what helped me successfully apply for a master's in marine science. And that photo there is of me scuba diving and surveying coral reefs in Tobago following a big bleaching event back in 2010. And that just that was it. I think after that, I realized I was going to be a marine biologist. And that reality came very quickly when I landed a job in the Galapagos. Right after my master's, I became a junior researcher at the Charles Darwin Research Station, which is what you can see in the image here, that the blue arrow shows the marine department there. And I lived and worked there. The town in the background is Puerto Ayora, which Sylvia is very familiar with, and the research station as well. And I lived in this town for 4 years and worked here for almost 4 years. And I got this amazing chance to work in the shallow reefs, doing ecological monitoring. Then I also worked on the Sharks project. And I then stumbled even deeper by accident into the deep sea research program, which consisted of a bunch of hard drives of deep sea footage from the Nautilus. And I was in charge of analyzing that data. And that's when I realized this is all brand new organisms that no one has ever seen before. And as a person who felt like I didn't really belong in marine biology, I realized, well, if no one knows anything about them, then I'm right where I'm meant to be, because now I know more than most people.
That's right.
I'm the expert.
And just for some context, for those who don't know the Galapagos, it's an archipelago, part of the Ecuadorian, it's a province of Ecuador. And it actually has people, about 35,000 people live permanently here. And the blue arrow shows where the island there where we were based in the Charles Darwin Foundation, that's called Santa Cruz. And the black line you see around the archipelago is the Galapagos Marine Reserve, a really important and one of the oldest marine reserves in the world, and one of the oldest and largest. And this recently actually got an extension of 60,000 kilometers squared added to it, which is the green band. It's been an yeah, go ahead, please.
I think it's important to observe that 97% of the land is really safeguarded nature. Only about 3% is where places like the Darwin Station and the places where people are concentrated. The rest is kind of left alone. I mean, there are some problems with invasive insect plants and things, but and also cats and dogs.
Yeah, a few mammals.
And goats. But for the ocean, it was fairly recently that
40 years after.
They call it a marine reserve, but for many years after it was established, only about 3% was safe for the fish.
This is correct. Yeah, I have a slide towards the end that shows that it's only like, yeah, you're right, actually less than 3% of areas that are no-take zones that are fully protected. The rest is, even though it's protected and industrial fishing has been fully banned, there is still a local fishery, what we call an artisanal fishery of about 1,000 fishermen that are still allowed to fish in most of the marine reserve. And then there's tourism practices as well. And as Sylvia pointed out, around 1% is actually fully protected as no-take zones for conservation. And there's a plan to extend these, and it still needs to be approved. And I'm hoping that the work that I'm doing will influence that, because I think the kelps need protecting, but I'll get into that.
I hope so too.
Just one important observation, that they're local fishermen, but the market is international. So those lobsters go even to North America, they go to Japan and China, Europe, and the sharks and the tunas that are taken, and even what they call the white fish, that means with white meat, like the groupers, a big market in Ecuador. And so it's not just local market, it's international.
Legalized wildlife trafficking still.
Yeah, it is like, even though the consumption was originally meant for, it's an artisanal fishing fleet that is meant to be for local consumption, they are legally allowed to export the fish, which I guess encourages it to be a marketable activity than just a local consumption activity.
Absolutely right. What you're doing to really understand the nature of what's beyond just the shallow water, I think is just a revelation to a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is. Speaking of, so in Galapagos, I like to remind everyone the reason why this is such a special place, not just because of the tortoises on land and all the land animals that helped Darwin develop his theory of evolution, but in fact, most of us marine scientists would agree that the best part of the Galapagos is under that flat surface that you see. And when you go down, there's just an incredible jungle of crazy life. And it's so crazy that you can see a penguin that usually belongs to the Antarctic, to the polar region, swimming next to a parrotfish that strictly belongs to a coral reef. So for most of us who are into marine science, we think this is a crazy experience to see this combination. And this only happens in a place like Galapagos because it has this really exceptional geological oceanographic setting. This is the archipelago here, and the arrows represent 4 different currents that are of different temperatures that collide in this archipelago. So we have a really cold water current that comes from the deep called the Chromo current, and that hits against the western part, so that's Fernandina, Isabella, and brings this productive water full of nutrients and allows for a lot of phytoplankton to grow. And then we have all this productivity. And then we have warm water coming from the southeast, from the east. And that warm water allows for coral reefs and tropical species to exist. And that's how we have this incredible remix of cold water and warm water species, something that you'll never see anywhere else. And in Galapagos, it's a place where you need to take your 5 mil, like your 3 mil wetsuit if you're going to go diving, and a 6 mil wetsuit, because in some parts it'll be 25 and in other parts it'll be 15. In some parts it looks like the Caribbean, and others it looks like California.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
You even need a dry suit for sometimes.
Oh, some people do the dry suit. I've been surfing in BC in 8 water degree, and I feel like I can handle the 15-degree water there now. And yeah, so in the Galapagos, not only do we have diverse set of of species, but we also have a diverse set of ecosystems. We have mangroves, we have beaches, we have rocky reefs. But the part that is special for me, and I realize what makes the Galapagos so special for the deep sea, is that we have, in fact, the biggest part of the Galapagos Ocean is deep water. It lies below 1,000 meters. And because it's a volcanic archipelago, it is riddled with seamounts and ledges and just all this geologic diversity of vertical walls. However, it's these ecosystems in the deep that represent over 97% of the marine reserve that we know very little about. We actually have a pretty good inventory of what's happening in the shallow, between 5 to 20, 30 meters. But after that, it's like we've had a blind spot. That being said, Galapagos is very lucky, and the research station too. Since 2015, there's been a deep sea research program, which I was a part of. I joined in 2017, and it's currently led by Stuart Banks. And we've been very lucky because to study the deep sea, you need crazy technology, and we've been able to collaborate with the different groups that are going around the world helping collect deep sea data. So including Mission Blue. And they've brought submarines and complex ROVs to collect amazing data that I've had the opportunity to help analyze and collect and work on the samples. And so when this technology comes, there's a big focus to go as deep as possible, right? Because it feels like this is a chance to go as deep as you can. And this kind of like, this is a 3D cartoon map that Woods Hole created for us. And it shows all the red circles are like the sites that we're always interested in hitting when we get the deep sea tools. And I recently actually got the chance to go in one of these amazing tools. In fact, a mini submarine back in 2023. I went into the Alvin and I went as deep as 700 meters. And it was amazing to get to see these, like this, I felt like I was living in a virtual reality, only looking at the videos of the work I was doing. And suddenly I got to see it live and in person. And actually, Sylvia also gave me that opportunity when I went with her in a sub. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But what we're seeing here is a cold water reef down at 300 meters. And we recently discovered the largest cold water reef in the Galapagos. And now we found that this one exists in 3 more sites. So it's been amazing. So we were right. We thought the Galapagos would likely have incredible deep sea biodiversity, given that it's a rock in the middle of nowhere and there's so much food coming from the shallow waters. And now we've got that confirmation. This is another shot of beautiful, this is actually a black coral. And corals, similar to kelps, they're like what we call them animal forests, because they also create places where other organisms can live on. And this is what we call a coral garden or an animal forest. And it's just beautiful down here. But the only time we can go into that deep place is when these expeditions come. That happens like once in a moon. Like we've been lucky in the last decade, but really there'll be gaps of like 10 years where an opportunity to go that deep is gone. And in the Galapagos, we actually have a lot of, part of our ocean is between 200 and 40 meters deep, which is called the mesophotic zone, which is a zone where you still have light. And this is actually the zone where a lot of fishermen go fishing. It's closer to the islands. And we have what we call bajos, which are like knolls, essentially smaller seamounts, all over the place, which are in these little circles here. And I realized also recently the technology is changing so fast on tools that we can go deeper down, and they're not as expensive. Recently, we've had a breakthrough of ROVs costing as cheap as $10,000 to $50,000. Back in the day, you've been in the number of the millions. So I wrote a message to these guys here at Video Ray to see if they wanted to support us, because they worked with the Charles Darwin Foundation back in the early 2000s, and they were game. And I wrote this proposal to do this pilot study to go and see what we can find on these shallower seamounts, looking from like 100 to 40 meters. And I was hoping to find coral gardens, like black corals, and this was kind of the setup. So here you can see, this is a lot more affordable. This is a boat that I could rent for like $1,000 a day, lower down this ROV. And here we have a nice battle with this looks tidy now, but usually the tether is a holy mess. Liz knows.
The figure eight is a very good way to control it, let me tell you.
Yeah. So this was kind of the setup at the top, and I'm sitting there with the hat in the corner, trying not to be. I'm probably like 5 minutes away from barfing there. And we found some stuff, but it wasn't all that, because in the end, when you're down in the deep, it's such a huge space. It's like looking for a pin in a haystack to like actually like locate these ecosystems. Even though there's many of them, it's just such a vast space. But on the last day, as we lowered the ROV on this shallow seamount called Bajo San Luis, I remember looking at this footage in the screen at the top and thinking, what on earth is this? And I thought it was a black coral, and then I was like, oh my God, it's kale. And someone corrected me and said, you mean kelp? and kelp it was indeed. And we were all just flabbergasted, completely unexpected. And but so much of it, and it was just like waving there, saying hello to us. And yeah, if you can see here at the top, that's at 50 meters deep. So it's in that zone where we cannot dive anymore, at least not dive using traditional recreational methods.
Mm-hmm.
And why is this so special? Well, kelp, I know you two know, especially Sylvia, who's a phycologist herself. But for those who don't know, kelps are seaweeds, and they are actually not plants. They're the Chromista kingdom. And for those of you who live like in California, you probably are familiar with some kelp, especially like the giant kelp or the bull kelp. Many of these have like air bubbles, and that's how they're able to form these giant forests. The kelp that we found here is what we call a stipated kelp. It has like a stipe that looks like a stem and then blades. And what makes kelp so special is that they grow so fast. They're like the fastest growing seaweed. They're incredibly important at supporting biodiversity and supporting really large food webs. And just like trees in a forest, if you need those trees to have the forest and all its animals, and if you remove the trees, then that ecosystem is gone, which is why they're studied a lot by marine biologists, and they're just highly treasured. And what's so fascinating about what we found is that kelps have certain needs to exist. And number one is light, because they're photosynthetic. They need a hard substrate. Usually they're in cold water, and cold water holds more nutrients, which is why kelps are usually found in the cold parts of the world, so in the higher latitudes, so here and down here, and not in the tropics. In the tropics, we tend to have coral reefs. But Galapagos is this exceptional place, and if it has penguins, well, why not kelp? And we actually knew about the existence of kelp since the 1940s, and this is called Eisenia galapagensis. It's endemic, which means it only exists in Galapagos, and it's also endangered because since the big El Niños happened, as the biggest one recorded and surveyed before and after was the 83, and kelp pretty much disappeared from all shallow coastlines. So this is why when we found this kelp forest, we were excited. No one who was like in my none of my colleagues had ever seen the Galapagos kelp species. So I was just fascinated. And we also thought that it looked quite different, but there was somebody who wasn't that surprised we found it. And she happened to be around in the Galapagos a few months after I did this discovery, and Sylvia actually wrote a paper back in the 1970s saying that there is a lot of potential for the deeper zone to have a lot of macroalgae, and there needs to be exploration done down there. So I think when I found it, she was just like, bingo, finally someone's done it. And that was the day she also coaxed me into doing a PhD. Thank you.
Wait, did she really coax you, or was it just kind of more like the titanium 2x4 going, you must do this?
Well, it was more like she asked me if I was Dr. Buglass, and I was like, oh no, I'm just a junior researcher. I don't intend to do a PhD. And so the answer, like, why not? You need one. Go get it. And I was like, okay. So sometimes I love you for it, sometimes not so much. When I'm trying to get these last chapters done. But no, I'm very happy that I'm very lucky that I have this incredible project. And Sylvia also promised to help me collect more data and more samples, and she was planning a expedition back in 2019 to the Galapagos anyway, and she rerouted the expedition to do a stop at the kelp forest, and it was amazing to see it from a submarine. That's when we realized this is football fields of kelp forest in the deep. It's not just like a little bushy patch.
Yeah.
And it was really good to see that, because on ROV you just kind of get this view and it's like quite messy, but getting to see it like that was just a much better realization of like the extent of this. And we got some awesome samples, and that kind of gave me enough data to go and apply for a PhD program. And here I am in my 4th year. And one of the things that I really want to find out is, are these deep water kelp forests, do they represent shrinking relics from a colder past, i.e. are these kelps that came here like established in the last glacial maxima and kind of just like had to go deeper to find colder water, or are they resilient and abundant mesophotic ecosystems, given that in the Galapagos we have so much mesophotic habitat where they could be? So I'm trying to figure out is this the last spot that we found, or maybe there's many of them? And the other thing that I want to find out is, could they possibly be climate change refugia, which means is this an ecosystem that, because it's a bit deeper and it's a bit colder, as we have these heat waves, marine heat waves every summer, and every summer the coasts are getting warmer, because of stratification, it's possible that down here things stay the same, meaning that this is a complex ecosystem. Other species can hide during warm times on the surface. So those are the things that I'm addressing. Do you have any comments before I go on? I feel like I've been like going hard here at my presentation.
Well, so you feel like the overall distribution of kelp in the Galapagos is likely to be larger than what you've seen so far, right?
So this is what I've been trying to find out, and I have found another kelp patch about 60 kilometers away from this one. So not on a seamount, but just on a rolling slope on top of a rotolith bed. And then with Sylvia, we found the OG kelp, that is Asenia galapagensis, which we think might be a different subspecies or species to this one here. But I can talk about that more. I've got some slides on that. But for those of you who really want to nerd out on the findings, I've 1.5 years ago, I published the first paper on the findings. So it's available online, and I think you're going to be shared a link. And in this paper, we've done the genetics to see if this is similar to any of the Asenia species that exist around the world. So Asenia is the genus of this kelp species, and there's actually Asenia all the way in Korea and Japan. And then from Alaska, there's Asenia arborea, and it goes all the way down to Peru and Chile. So the one that we found here in Galapagos, based on our genetic understanding, is different to the 3 ones that are in the northern hemisphere. But up until recently, we didn't have the genetic samples of the Asenia galapagensis, of the original kelp that used to be found in the shallow parts, and the one in Peru. So that's something we are still working on. That being said, we have some samples for this kelp, because in 2022, we did another expedition together, and I was very lucky to be invited on the Mission Blue expedition. And we decided to go back to the far west, to the place where they were where this Galapagos kelp, the endemic species, was last seen. And every day, the question was, have we found kelp? For about 20 days, and then and I think it was the second last day we did, right? And it was great. I was thrilled, and so we found it actually diving first, and then we also went down in the sub and tried to see if there was a big patch, and we found it indeed. This is some footage of the Eschenia galapagensis, and yeah, this is in its thickest form that I've seen it. And this was actually with Taylor, Sylvia's grandson, who was there with me, and we were both squeaking in joy of finding the kelp. One thing I want you to notice is the how little visibility, how green the water is right at the top here. And that is because this is the part of the archipelago that is really productive, because that's where the upwelling happens. And this is one of the reasons why the kelp here is not as deep. It's actually between 20 to 30 meters. And I think it would be hard for it to be deeper down, because the light wouldn't go as deep. But those are all questions that I'm going to answer in my PhD. So stay tuned when my chapter in my PhD is done. But we got the samples that I needed to send to my geneticist at last, and also we collected a lot of stems that I needed, because I'm trying to age the kelps by counting the rings in the age growth rings in the stem, and I'll show a few more images of that. And the other part of my research has been to go back to the other two sites where I found the new kelp, the deep water kelp. And this has been part of my PhD. I was very lucky. I got to purchase my own little ROV that was like $10,000 from Blue Robotics. Nice. And it was a lot of work, from learning how to build it to drive it, to fight the seasickness, to fix it.
Those little tiny ROVs are, they're very limited, but they can really get the job.
Yeah. This was a little practice run on how to collect a pretend kelp, and I actually managed to collect 3 samples in the deep. This is kind of like a sped up version, and at the top I'm cursing and hurraying half of the time while doing this. But I have a little arm on the ROV, and that's where I managed to grab it, and we had to like yank it off, because the hold fast is really well established, and that's it coming up. And a sneaky sea lion wanted to steal my precious sample.
Oh no, look at it.
And I love the Galapagos sea lion, but that moment it was my biggest enemy. Yes. So what's amazing what you can do with these small ROVs. It is a lot of hard work, and my video footage, I did a lot of video transects, which I'm analyzing now. They are very challenging. So there's the beauty and the tough part of doing pioneer kind of work. But you get a smile like this when you collect a sample by yourself. So I was pretty happy about those. And the reason why I wanted some samples is I learned that, like trees, you can actually age and count the rings in the stipe, which is the type of stem. And so I've been aging them and trying to figure out how old they are, because I'm really interested in understanding the population size structure of the current kelp forest, to see how old the oldest ones are. And that gives me an understanding of maybe when there was a big wipeout event. And as of right now, sorry, the slide is a little bit messy, but what I found was that the oldest were about 6 years, and that coincides with last El Nino of 2016. So it's possible that this is a sign that the heat waves are affecting the kelp forest. However, they're back and they're resilient. And the other part that I'm studying is also understanding that this graph here shows that was the last El Nino, and some of the oldest kelps are as old as when the last El Nino happened. So it gives me an idea of when the last wipeout was. But also what it shows is that it's a resilient ecosystem. And unlike coral reefs that take a really long time to grow back, kelp can grow pretty fast. So that gives me, I like when I study a hopeful ecosystem. Kelp,
That's
kelps
especially
are not the canary in the coal mine. They are like the resilient badasses, and if they're disappearing, it's because we're doing a terrible job at protecting things.
So how do you think they're coming back? Is there some sort of, dormant condition, or
Yeah, they have an alternate phase.
alternate phase?
Yeah, actually I have some. Yeah, so this is a good image of that. So yeah, kelp have, as Sylvia was pointing out, they have two life phases, or most algae do. They have a sporophyte phase, which is what we see here, like it's in its blades, but it also has a gametophyte phase, and it can live up to 7 years in some species, or more even, in a gametophytic phase, which is microscopic, and they're just like they're just living on the seafloor attached, just waiting for the right moment. Usually the stimuli is light, and that happens when a big wipeout happens and there's suddenly light because the older kelps are gone, and then the young ones can come. And this is a photo of a juvenile. So, and this is really interesting for me to have found as well. Not every kelp is an old, well-established, more than 2 years old kelp, but we also have lots of juveniles, which shows that there's active recruitment, and that's a sign of a system that is doing well and probably has resilience. And even so, especially like if wipeout happens, that would be sad, but I think they would bounce back. That's based from what I can see, given that we're seeing recruits. But I'll bring us back to the slide I was before. The other thing that I had to do for my fieldwork was this device I'm dropping down here. It's called a CTD. It's what do you call this? A sensor, a multi-sensor, oceanographic multi-sensor that measures temperature, conductivity, essentially salinity and depth. And I also added onto it a light sensor, because I'm really interested in understanding how much light are these kelps working, because that's another thing that's been fascinating all the phycologists or people who study seaweed. Is like, what the hell is this large, fast-growing kelp doing at such depths? And these terrible graphs that I've popped out recently out of R kind of just show here, the bottom ones is light, so PAR, that's photosynthetic active radiative light. And if you notice, they all go into almost like the zero over the zero very quickly as we go deeper. And where I put the red, the yellow, the green, this green band is where the depth at which the kelps are at. So at the Bajo San Luis, which is where I discovered the kelp for the first time, they are working with 4.8 UMOs of light, which is very, very little. Like, it's usually at the top, they're working with something like 1,000 waves, whereas at the bottom, it's like 4, which is extremely little. And the red and the blue is the warm season and the cold season. So I took samples during the warm season and the cold season, expecting for the warm season to be more light because there's less productivity. And it doesn't seem to be the case necessarily in every place. So it's just pretty incredible that they're just working with such little light. But maybe we need to learn more about kelp. Maybe they have a much better potential to work with less light than we thought. So shifting some paradigms here.
Part of the reason, the underlying significance of what you're doing here really translates to how much energy, how much photosynthesis is actually going on in the ocean. There are books that say that sunlight can penetrate for effective photosynthesis only to about 100 meters in the very clearest ocean water. And many of the estimates of how much productivity the ocean generates as compared to the land is based on satellite observations. I think it's important to acknowledge that those satellite observations only are able to determine productivity down to a few meters, maybe 10 meters. But there's a lot going on in this well, and even down to 200 meters, especially the red algae, the rhodoliths, that not only capture carbon, but they keep it. Their calculus to make lumpy, limey nodules, but they continue to photosynthesize. And they may be very old, but they still keep going and growing, and capturing and holding carbon.
So what do you guys think about this whole notion of growing or stimulating kelp just to
Capture carbon?
Capture carbon.
Red lights flashing.
Red lights flashing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think they're not wrong in that, like, there's potential for algae to, I mean, that algae needs to, seaweed ecosystems need the protection they deserve for the ecosystem services they provide, and sequestering carbon is definitely one of them. But geoengineering long ropes out in the open ocean, my concern there would just be there are ecosystems deep down, and they're full of life, and we might be altering their ecosystem by dropping now all this like energy. So I think we need to be very careful, and just like allow the science to inform us better before we jump the gun on getting too excited about growing kelp that does grow extremely fast. Like if you put ropes out there, within a month you'll have huge amounts of productivity.
I'm concerned about displacing the natural systems are doing their job. They have been doing that. The perception is there's nothing there, which could not be further from the truth.
Just full of life.
Yeah, it's been shaping the nature of the planet long before there were humans around, and for us to assume the way we assume the land, you go to a place, a forest, and you think, well, we can improve on this. We can plant corn, or we can plant
soybeans or
cows,
yeah,
tobacco, or cities, or whatever. The ocean is regarded as free goods, an open space, and it's you don't have to pay taxes on it. You know, it's just, you know, things that seem a little bit too good to be true probably are too good to be true. But I'm worried about the damage, as you are, that displacing what is already there working. It's like the engine is already turning along. Don't disturb the engine.
Yeah, I mean, I could see growing kelp in aquaculture for a food source, you know, so you're not taking it from the wild.
Yeah,
doing
but
it.
that's also, I think that there can also be misguided, because I feel like sometimes some groups might want to try to double dip in that. They're like, oh, we're farming kelp to sequester carbon, but then we are harvesting and selling it in products that means it's not being set in storage for over probably maybe like from 1 year to 5, and that is not sequestering carbon. And I think that's once again maybe the market trying to manipulate our nature to make more money instead of actually
always.
But and actually this goes for my next slide, which is about measuring nutrient levels. Kelp need nutrients to grow, and if we grow kelp in the middle of the ocean, in the open ocean, where phytoplankton needed, which is what Sylvia is worried about, is like there is phytoplankton needing this that was there before the kelp, that needs this nutrient to do their natural blooms. And if suddenly is kelp now they're using up that nitrogen, then what happens to the phytoplankton blooms? Will they not have any? And most of the ecosystem below that is used to eating phytoplankton, not kelp. So yeah, I think we need to like make sure we slow down about getting too excited about putting out ropes and ropes of kelp. But yeah, for me to understand better the kelp in the Galapagos, that's one of the things that I studied as well. I collected lots of water samples at each site and looked at the nutrients level at the surface and at the bottom, with my theory that there's more nutrients deeper down, which has always been, anyone who knows oceanography knows that that is likely the case, that there's more nutrients deeper down. And that is the case of what I'm finding. So that's been kind of like neat to kind of often, and when in research, we know the theory, but we need the data to say it is so. So it's nice to have now data that backs up like the things that I'm going to say to explain why we're finding kelp in these places. And then lastly, I don't know if you noticed on the ROV, I would attach this device that look essentially is 2 more cameras.
The laser.
And yeah, there was also lasers, but these are 2 cameras, and this is called a stereo
Oh, the
video
stereo.
set. Yeah, and the reason why this is important is often just going down with one video is great because then you'll see what is down there and I get presence and absence. But with a stereo video, I get to measure the exact size of things. And this is how these red lines, oh, let me just put this bigger. I don't know, can you see the red lines here? So in this software, I calibrate the stereo video system, and essentially based on principles of geometry, if you're taking an image of one thing at the same time with two cameras and you know the angle, then you can actually measure the exact size of the things within that image. So this is one of the methods that I'm using. So on the ROV, I would attach a stereo video camera set, and this way I could actually measure the size of things. And size matters in the sense that fish, it's good to know what if fish are a certain size. We know they're juveniles and not adults, which means that this is a place where juveniles and baby fish seek protection versus maybe large fish are eating or hunting. So it's, with fish, it's important to know the size. And also for the kelp, the size of the stipe, I'm building a relationship with the age, the coins that I showed you of how I'm aging the kelp. I'm building a relationship between the size of the stipe and how old they are. So I'm hoping to be able to infer based on the size, the population size structure. And then I get an idea of what age group of kelp is dominating this forest. And that gives us more information about how old this kelp forest is. And yeah, just watching videos like this has been my existence for the last year. But honestly, I love it. I could look at this forever. And what I lastly want to show you here is just, even though it's dark, look at all the fish. I mean, it's beaming with life down here. And if we are finding kelp forests with all of this life just by throwing a little ROV a little deeper than usually, I think this is a stark reminder of how little we know about what is in our oceans. And we shouldn't be we would have thought we would have found all the kelp forests by now and the different species. And here we are. And I think, yeah, like many of us, I think we know so little about the ocean. Most of our information is from the shallow coast. So I think we have so much to learn from not just deeper water, but just a little bit deeper than scuba diving capacity.
Yep, you don't have to go too much deeper and to find some really incredible new things or rediscover them. You did that out at Pulleys Ridge in the Gulf of Mexico, is kind of going back and rediscovering areas.
All over the world.
Yeah. So
and then lastly, it's really important that we knowing where these ecosystems are. This is not just a cute ecosystem. This is an ecosystem that is providing life and food for so many other species, and is clearly important. And it's not a coincidence that it's in places. Actually, the places that I went to try the ROV were coordinates that the fishermen gave me. So I was going to places where fishermen fish, and I mean, we work collaboratively, and they were very. In fact, I found this kelp forest here, the second one, thanks to a fisherman who told me like, "Hey, I found your algae." And we went out and I sent the ROV down, and indeed it was. And they find this very cool because they also never get to see what's down there, right? They don't know the habitats of where the fish live. But the map I'm showing you here is the Galapagos Marine Reserve that I showed you earlier. And the green parts are the new proposed no-take zones or conservation zones that is still being negotiated, I believe. And if you notice, the two kelp forests are not inside of there. So I'm hoping that once all my work is done, I want to present this to the Galapagos National Park, let them know where these kelp forests are and maybe other areas where I suspect they could be. Because in the end, we scientists don't actually have time to map and put cameras into the entire seafloor. But if we start giving them basic information of like this type of depth, this type of light, this type of currents, and you likely have kelp forests there, maybe it's just for safeguard, protect a few pockets here and there, or the entire space. Yeah, and this image here is not in the Galapagos, luckily. It's an image from California showing what is an urchin barren. And this is some of the ecological catastrophes that are happening to the kelp forests off the coast of California and here in BC, Canada as well. And this is a result of when we remove the predators of the urchins. And this is when humans start reconfiguring the food web, because we have a preferred fish we like to eat. If it happens to also be the fish that eats all the urchins, then the urchins suddenly can explode and completely graze down a kelp forest that it ceases to exist, and with it all the species that come along it. And this is something in ecology that we call the Cascadian effect of overfishing. And this is something that I want to prevent. In my videos, when I see the kelp, I see all of these, they're called sheephead wrasse, which are these wrasse. They have big mouths and they love an urchin. They crunch them up. And I saw those, and they're really important. So I think this is something I want to highlight for the national park. Is it's really key that these species stick around, and that we probably like ban their fishing, hopefully, or at least manage it or reduce it, and to make sure that we don't lose this endemic, rare, tropical kelp that exists in the Galapagos. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Over to questions. You can maybe stop sharing the screen so we can pop up bigger.
Sounds good.
Awesome, thank you. But yeah, I mean, it was really important, I think, for you to show the what can happen where kind of overfishing occurs, and sometimes people don't even think of it as being like overfished, like Monterey National Marine Sanctuary. But there's guys out there fishing every single day,
Even
taking
commercial fishing,
fishing, taking the rockfish, the lingcods, the kelp bass that are really kind of voracious urchin
and they
eaters.
live a long time. You can take like the rockfish.
Yeah, 30, 40, 60 years anyway.
As old as I am. Oh, that's old.
Not that old. But yeah, and to your point, like the big sheep's heads, they really just come along and crunch those guys up. But I think it's getting protecting the fish that eat the urchins when they're small as well, because fish or otter or other predator can eat the big urchins, but they can, many of them.
Starfish are also
Stars,
sea stars.
That's the whole day, right? But yeah, there's lots of animals that when you start to pick the system apart.
It's the food web in action, and we have corrupted those closely coupled systems, taking what we want and not really accounting for the cost or the consequences. It just seemed it's all free goods. But that was then. This is now. Now we know we can make adjustments to our way of treating the ocean. I can't really fault those in the past who really did not understand the magnitude of the impact they were having and why it matters, not just to us, but to the functioning of the planet as a whole.
All right, we're jumping to a couple of the questions here. So
we got some good ones, some science ones.
Christy is asking, when you're determining the stipe length of multiple individuals, how do you correct for the differing depths since they are growing on uneven surfaces? Do you need a map and measure the seafloor as reference for the stipe measurements?
That's a great question, and while it's something that I definitely think about, how kelps that are less deep, which means they're closer to light, they have an advantage of growing faster. And the way that I would need to do this is make sure I have the depths of which I do. So the ROV was measuring depth the entire time, and then I would include that in as a factor when I'm trying to test for looking at things that influence stipe length, and I can put out my depth parameters in as a factor that is hopefully correcting or letting me know that it is having a significant difference.
Very good. Oh my God, the questions are piling in now. That's good.
Yeah.
Jean is asking, what if anything is grazing on the kelp biomass? Is grazing significant?
In the Galapagos? So that's a really interesting question, because I've collected data at the shallower kelp forests that are in the far west, which is the original kelp, the Eisenia galapagensis, which is already identified. And that one lives between 20 to 30 meters. And there, when I came back in the warm season, they were all munched off. And
Wow.
I suspect turtles and marine iguanas.
And the urchins.
You do
Well,
get,
so I suspect them because the stipe's still there and the blades are just like whomp. And urchins usually eat from the holdfast or the blades that are already on the floor. So I think it might be, so we have so many turtles in the Galapagos. I kid you not, when you go diving here, the first day everyone's like, a turtle. And then like towards the end, you're like, oh, it's
oh, turtle.
yeah, it's like, shoo, go away. And however, in the deep kelp forests that are between 50 and 70 meters, there I have all the fish that I have found, none of them are grazers. And that's something I can look up in a thing called fish base. It tells me the eating behavior of that species. I have seen urchins, but they're all in pockets, because another thing that I didn't show was that there is current down here. And one of the big challenges of the ROV was just like this happening and analyzing this footage, not so fun.
Yeah.
But I think that whipping is really important to keeping grazers off, that the blades whipping from one side to the other. So I would say it's probably at depth, it is the sea urchins that are probably the main grazers, and also very small things like bryozoans. And I haven't seen any yet, just because I don't have that. That is where the gold is in diving and being there physically to see it. Is that's where you can get the details of snails. Usually it's like the macro grazers. Snails are the ones that are doing a lot of eating. But on the samples that I collected, there's a lot of bryozoans on the blades, and bryozoans can create a kind of crunchy, hard surface that creates tears to happen more easily.
Weakens the structure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen loads of those, especially in the warm season. So that's interesting too, that I see it more as the oceans get warmer.
Yeah. Amphipods and isopods, little crustaceans, probably
Yes.
get some
Yes.
snakes.
Yeah, I couldn't see them, but actually I had an interesting moment where the two of the samples that I collected, I put them in a tank of a saltwater tank that my colleagues have, in tanks where they do experiments. And the substrate is packed with arthropods, like crabs, and they ate up the blades in 2 days.
Wow.
They frazzled my blades. I was like, oh my God. And I mean, I can't make any conclusions of that, because those are those are very shallow crabs, but they definitely like the flavor.
Yeah. Yummy.
Yeah.
Okay. Stanton says, amazing talk. Is the genetic work on kelp specifically focused on kelp identification?
In this case, for the case of my work, yes, but my collaborator is very interested in looking at seeing how long ago this kelp speciated from the ones that come either from North America or from South America, and then understanding how different the two kelp species are, or kelp populations are. So I haven't published this yet, but don't tell too many people. We're finding that it is the same species, but my geneticist is not convinced, because they physically look so different. And what we're actually witnessing is very typical for the Galapagos, which is speciation in action. These are two kelps that have been separated by depth and also by region in the Galapagos. They probably are not cross-pollinating, and they're just looking very different physically. Or they could be a difference in the ecotype. So there might be different ecotypes, the same species, but under different environmental regimes. They just physically look very different, but we suspect that they're actually like starting to speciate. But genetics is a bit of a dark science, I've learned. Like it's not crystal clear. It's when are we talking new or different species? Like how different enough does it have to be? But I'm not a geneticist. But thanks for the question.
Okay, so Emily is asking, do these species of kelp grow as tall off the west coast of the US, or does the lower level of light stunt their growth?
I've seen Asenia arborea, which is the kind of like sister, the same genus, and they're a little bit taller and fatter. stipe-wise, but I from my video surveys, I have actually measured some pretty tall kelps that, like, with blade and everything, extend more over 2 meters. So they can reach similar heights. I think the question there is, when do they stop? Do they ever stop growing, or is this like an age thing? Like, what is their size versus like how long they live? And I think most of these kelps, like for example, Asenia arborea is known to live up to 15 years, potentially, and then usually there's like a big El Nino storm, and then they get wiped out and they start over again. So yeah, all of these are great questions, and I hope to answer them more as I consolidate my data.
Okay, Deborah is asking, where does human behavior destroy the most kelp?
Can you two help me? Where?
I mean, off the California coast, we see a tremendous amount of kelp destruction. I mean, you know,
Chile, where they're
Chile, yeah,
yeah.
where they've got a lot of the
where they
fish farming going on, and
no, actually kelp
Kelp farming.
farming,
collection, not
kelp
farming
collection.
as
Yeah.
much as kelp cutting.
Yeah. Oh, the kelp cutting. Yeah, they just like mow it off, don't they?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the commercial, where there's an appetite for the commercial use, and it's growing, that as people become aware of the potential marketplace for the wild forests, they're really having an impact.
Mhm.
Cutting tops.
Except in deep water. I don't think there's any
Yeah.
any
And I
even-
would also add the removing otters many years ago from all over the Pacific coast must have had a huge impact that we probably weren't even there to witness or were aware of. But the otters are such good urchin eaters.
They are. Yeah.
That when that species became extinct in most of the coastline across the Pacific, it probably had a huge
Yeah.
impact on kelp, but that was pre-scuba diving and snorkeling days. So who knows how our baseline is probably shifted of our understanding of how much kelp forest there is now versus then.
and the warming.
And the warming. But you know, if you go back and look at some of the indigenous stories, you know, they talk about the kelp highway, right?
Yes,
you know,
I love that theory. It gets me so excited.
yeah, I'm just like, oh, kelp highway.
But it's a combination. The fishing, the large scale fishing in particular, it's like with the coral reef. Coral reef is not just about the coral. Kelp forests are not just about the kelp. It's about the whole system. And when you take any piece of it away, or alter the composition in terms of just the numbers, taking out the lobsters, taking out sharks. I mean, it's a whole chain of events that are closely coupled. And first you have to know how the system works to be able to determine which parts are missing, which parts are broken because of our impact. But for sure, our appetite for sea cucumbers, our appetite for urchins, our appetite for whatever can be sold has an impact.
Even the kelp.
Yeah, even the kelp is.
An opposite, and not opposite, a positive one is they say that possibly harvesting urchins can actually help some kelp during those big urchin explosions. But I haven't seen any publications on the actual restoration, but that's been interesting. I think there's been encouragement to harvest urchins because there's so many because we've removed their predators.
But that's a system out of whack.
Yeah.
Urchins are a natural part of the system.
Yeah.
They, like every other thing, they have a place. They give back. Where they, I haven't really tracked urchins to see all of, or I don't think we know all of the impacts, but if you removed all of the urchins out of a system, something would be missing that is needed, whether it's nutrients or food, some way that over gazillions of years before there were humans, everything had a place. And
Yeah.
we have
And a fun fact about urchins that I learned while I was studying this dynamic was that urchins can live up to 100. They can get super old. So an urchin this big is somewhere around 50 years old. So it would break my heart to actually to know that they're fishing out these like
Giant.
old, yeah.
that you're doing something good to go out and slaughter the urchins. Just first know what you're doing. Give nature a break. Just stop the killing.
Yeah.
Let things come back to something like a, I don't know, harmonious relationship.
Yeah. Make peace with nature, as you say.
Let peace.
So you have a few more questions. We're gonna cheat a little bit and go just a little bit past 4.
We have
but
very little time.
We have very little time, I know. Let's see, we're going to say Jenny is asking, does kelp in deeper water make up for the lack of light by adjusting their metabolism? And if so, how do they do it?
I want to know this so bad as well. That is research that I feel like is going to be kind of the next thing, maybe in my postdoc. But it's I would need it to do a completely different study to do this, which is actually like taking out these kelps, producing them in the lab, and then under experimental conditions, and giving them the exact same conditions that they experience in the deep, which is why the data I'm collecting now is important, because then now we know what those conditions are. And then in the lab, you would reproduce them and grow them and start taking biopsies and looking at what the cells are doing, and them, especially the chloroplast. So I don't have the answer for you, but that is the type of work that gets so many phycologists excited, and they're just like, get a tank, get the kelps, reproduce them in the lab, and let's do all of these experiments, because these are really important. Those are the key questions in understanding like how they exist at the steps, and what are they doing to photosynthesize.
Part of the answer seems to be that the accessory pigments, not just chlorophyll. Chlorophyll does the heavy lifting in terms of photosynthesis, synthesizing the sugar that leads to the great food chains. But the accessory pigments can capture light, especially the red algae. You can see it. But some of these golden brown pigments apparently also. Then they pass the energy to chlorophyll. Then goes the usual thing with photosynthesis. You wonder about the same kind of thing, Salomé, don't you, in a deeply shaded forest with around where the ferns and mosses and liverworts grow. They get
photosynthesize with very little light,
the crowns of the trees high above. And so it's a wonderful area for not just speculation, but we just can't lose the answers. And some of these systems are being destroyed before we have a chance to
just find out who they are.
Yeah, it's true.
Understand.
Yeah.
Right. So we just have 2 comments. Lori is really impressed with your earrings.
I know that I stole them from my mom, who I think is connected, and it's probably like, I now know where they are.
And then Gabby, 9 years old Gabby, who says that she can't wait to become a scuba diver. And so keep after it, Gabby. We hope that you will become a scuba diver too. You have 1 more year to go, then you can get to certified. And
the first time I scuba dived in a kelp forest in California, I think that was the closest experience of what it's like to fly underwater, because in a forest you walk at the base, right, and you just look up, but in the ocean you get to float at the top of the canopy, and this is like you're flying on the top or in between the forest. So go and get that certification and find a kelp forest to dive in between.
And there's lots of scholarships out there, just like benefited, the Women Divers Hall of Fame and other agencies. They all have opportunities. So we encourage you to
the Young Explorer program with
Young
National
Explorers
Geographic.
Club. And then even the Student Explorers Club program. There's lots of things,
sure.
and really encouraging people of all ages and genders and very diverse group to get out there and dive in. So
And even cheaper, snorkeling. Snorkeling is almost as good if you, or free diving, less gear, a little bit more physio, like you need a good need to be sporty, but that's almost free once you get a mask and a wetsuit. So I
absolutely.
encourage you to do that too.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we close, we're just going to say thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thank you, Salomé, and thank you, Ocean Elders, and everyone in the diving community who keeps showing up for our programs. Water connects us all. We're so grateful, and we will be back next time to talk about manatees.
Yes.
Talk about it's a lot of marine
I
plants.
love manatees. I love them.
So until then, remain curious and remember, take care of the ocean.
As if
Yes.
your life depends on it, because
It does.
it does.
Thanks again. We'll see you next time, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now.